Vernetta is Vice President of Program, we said that. She's worked with many national and international nonprofit organizations addressing a wide range of governance issues, from how to start a nonprofit organization to improving board engagement and performance, and restructuring complex entities. Her areas of expertise include board roles and responsibilities, board self-assessments, understanding conflicts of interest, and legal compliance, and many other things. Her clients have included Habitat for Humanity International, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, YMCA, Smart Start agencies, the U.S. Black Chamber, and the Concordia University System, among others. Vernetta also leads BoardSource's diversity and inclusion work to help nonprofit boards address the challenges and obstacles of integrating successful diversity and inclusion strategies and practices. Previously, she practiced law for a large firm in Orlando, Florida for several years, and also served as Associate General Counsel for the Maryland Association of Nonprofit Organizations. And I'll skip ahead. Vernetta is a contributing author to a book that we all should have, Nonprofit Management 101, a complete and practical guide for leaders and professionals. So with that, welcome Vernetta.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Can you hear me? I didn't turn it on. He told me, do not forget to turn it on. I said, I won't. What's the first thing I did? So I'm really happy to be here. I may talk kind of fast because I have 60 minutes. And I've got to tell you, when I was on the phone with Bill, he says, well, can you talk about this? Can you talk about this? Can you talk about this? And by the time we finished, I had a list of about 8 or maybe even 10 things. And I said, okay, you know I only have 60 minutes. So I have shortened that list and really trying to get at strategic board engagement. That is a loaded title. So much involved in it. But I've also got to say, in the few minutes that I was sitting in the back of the room and I was watching how you were engaging at the table talk and sharing, and it was so lively and energetic, I wondered, well, what's the problem? I think you all have this all together, so you're going to have to help me out. What we're going to do for the next 60 minutes is really have a dialogue, a conversation. I may ask a number of questions to try to tee up some of the issues, but in order for this to be meaningful, you will have to engage with me. Fair enough? Okay, so we'll get started. Short agenda. I narrowed that list of 10 things down to 3. Going to talk about board building and engagement, how you really have to set that up right from the start, culture of inquiry, and meetings that matter. And I like reframing that to say, here's what we're really getting at. What are your processes that you're using to make sure that you get the right people on the bus? You've heard that frame before. How are you setting expectations for your board members? And what does the board really need to do its job well? If we want to keep them engaged, how do we feed that passion to make sure that everyone is getting something out of the experience? Now, I'd like to see by just a quick show of hands, who are my chief executives in the room? Quite a few of you. Board members, okay, and staff. Okay, just needed to get a sense of who's who. So this thing about governance, it's an ongoing experience. Sometimes it does feel like banging your head against the wall. But if you don't want to have that experience, then I'm going to give you about 3 minutes at your table just to share. If you could change anything at all about your board, what would you change and why? 3 minutes, go. Oh, yes. I'm going to say I know some of you serve on the national board as well. I'll let you choose. So you might think one is better than the other. I'll let you choose. You only have 3 minutes. So whoever has a great story to share. Okay, I knew once I opened that door, you would walk through it. But your 3 minutes are up. That's me banging my head against the wall. Okay, what did you hear? Anyone? Yes? Versus staff. She said to get the board members to understand the difference between being a board member and being a staff member. So I take that as maybe a little bit of micromanaging going on. Maybe don't want to put words in your mouth, but better suited as committee members. Okay, so you have board members who really want to do the work at a different level. It's not the governance level, it's a different level. Maybe used to being volunteers. What else? Anyone? Yes?
That passion. I mean, for us, it was a founding board, so there was a lot of passion. But 5 years later, it's like, oh, well, it's not as passionate as it once was. Put it that way.
How to keep the passion. You said 5 years later. Do you have term limits?
Actually, we did.
You did?
We have had to turn over some, but it hasn't been as efficient as we would have liked, yeah.
Okay. Someone's hand over here. Yes?
Actually, she just mentioned it is term limits as much as we currently don't have a term limit. So it's hard to cycle off, some board members who's no longer passionate or too passionate.
Okay. Need term limits. I'll come over here and then get you. Yes?
Getting the right mix of business corporations being represented and also community members and people that are really passionate about it.
Okay. Had this lady, then we'll come back to you. You have more to share. Yes?
I have a saying, speed the leader, speed the team. So it involves term limits, engagement of your committees and your board structure, validating their purpose, why are they there, and what can they share, instead of just occupying the chair once a month.
So what was the saying?
Speed of the leader, speed of the team. So when you look at your executive committee working in conjunction with your executive director, what are they really accomplishing? Do you have term limits? Have they been there for 20 years? Are there vacancies? Speed of the leader, speed of the team.
Speed of the leader, speed of the team.
Taking ownership.
Ownership. Okay, come back to you.
I was going to ask, written expectations of what the board member is.
Okay. One more. Last, well, no, I didn't get anyone from this table, so I'm coming back to you. Think about it. Yes?
Fundraising obligation.
So how would you change, it was what would you change and why? So what is it about it?
Change the board to embrace their fundraising obligation.
Embrace the fundraising. Okay, you have the last word.
So along those lines, I think one of us brought up the point, when we have a goal for fundraising from a board, it's either you bring their checkbook or else you go find the money.
When you have a fundraising goal, either you open your checkbook or you go find the money. Okay. So these are issues, concerns, etc., that I hear a lot. And my question to you, so I said, if you could change anything about your board, what would you change and why? So my next question to you is, what's stopping you? Okay? Because one of the things you have to realize, everyone in this room is a leader, which means that you have the power to do something about it. And if you're not exercising that power, why not? Is it maybe you don't have the resources, not quite sure how to go about it? Or is it really that you have not had an open, honest, and genuine conversation about what's going on in your boardroom? And quite often it starts there. Because while you were able to identify some things, believe me, others in that boardroom, they're thinking the same thing usually, right? So the issues that you see that might be holding your board back, others see it as well, but that doesn't mean that you have to live with it. So what we're going to talk about today is how do you change things and create the culture that you want to have. This is about board engagement, and I also like to talk about exceptional boards. And the thing about exceptional boards, it's not that we have to be perfect, but at least we can create a vision for what we want to be. Is there anyone in here who would raise their hand and say, you have an exceptional board? You do? I do. Okay, what makes your board exceptional?
Well, it's all volunteer.
Oh, he's giving you a mic, I'm sorry.
I'm Judy Lipnick from the Naples Council on World Affairs, and I have two of my exceptional board members here with me.
I'm not one of them.
Yeah, they're over here. But we are an all-volunteer board. Everybody on the board is a chair of some event or, it could also be a treasurer, which is sometimes an event. But anyhow, everybody who comes on the board knows that this is a working board, and the board almost always seeks its members. So even though we have applications for board membership, we have a fairly extensive interview process. And I don't think anybody's ever come on this board without knowing they were going to work their tail off. So yes, I have absolutely an exceptional board and 2,200 members and a waiting list. We're very proud. But what very important, these are retirees. And that makes a huge, big difference. I forgot that.
It does.
Yes, it does.
Does this mic work? Yes. Okay. I'll take one more on the exceptional board.
I'm a member of the Jacksonville board, and I do feel like it is exceptional in the sense there's total dedication to mission. Number two is that it is the board focuses in on key goals. It is strategic. It is deliberative. Their key expectations are there. They are a giving board. They are a getting board too. And I would say the biggest thing is that I go by the Groucho Marx philosophy. This board is so good, it would no longer have me on it. And so I look forward, my term is coming up soon, and it is really the type of board that people want to get on, they want to serve on, and the organization is growing, and it really is a result of the board.
Okay, so I love both of those board descriptions, especially what you said at the end about this is a board that other people want to get on, other people would like to serve on. So there are boards like that where there's actually a waiting list. And it really speaks to the work of that board and the organization. Now I want to introduce you to a concept. This won't be new for a lot of you, but not all boards are created equally. There's a range. Right? So I went for the very top. Who has an exceptional board? And truth of the matter is, I work with literally hundreds of boards, I see a small percentage in that exceptional box, a small percentage in the dysfunctional box, and most of them are somewhere in between. So let me start at the bottom, dysfunctional. I don't take it that any of your boards are dysfunctional, but just in case, let me give you a description. These are the boards that have a hard time getting a quorum. Board members stop showing up for meetings. When they do show up for meetings, they get very little accomplished. In fact, for some of these boards, maybe they show up, but their idea of a good meeting is, wow, we were going to meet for an hour, we're out in 58 minutes, I'm good, okay? That's not a board that's adding any value to your organization. The functional board, I say, of no real consequence, they do a little bit better. They do show up, they pay attention a little, but they're not engaged. And when I say engaged, I look at engagement a little bit differently. It's what types of conversations are you having in the boardroom? What decisions are being made? How is this board really thinking about the sustainability of the organization and contributing to the leadership along with the chief executive if there is one? I know that some of you have all volunteer boards, so you kind of sit on both ends of the table, both sides of the table. You're doing the work and you're providing the strategic leadership. The responsible board. I work with, I'd say, a good number of responsible boards. I don't knock the responsible boards because I love it that they're getting a lot of things right. But to move up to that exceptional level, and I just have anticipates, plans, sees opportunities, they're really engaging on a different level. So much so that when I walk in the boardroom, if I am observing a board meeting, I can pretty much figure out within 20 minutes where they are on this diagram, based on the types of questions they ask, how they structure their board meetings, and how they're really engaging and taking ownership for themselves. You can hear it in the conversation. They don't mind challenging one another. They're not waiting on staff to do all the work. They're not expecting, and it doesn't happen, where staff is giving all the reports, okay? This is a board that is really taking ownership for itself and accountable for itself. That said, it doesn't come easily. You have to put in some work, okay? And it is a continuous process. So I say governance in progress. Yeah, you have to put in work to get there. But in order to get there, it's helpful to paint a vision of what it looks like. So several years ago, BoardSource put out a book called The Source, 12 Principles That Power Exceptional Governance. I'm not going to go through all 12 because that would be way longer than our hour, but I am going to highlight a couple of principles here. But I want to take a few seconds just to, and you can get more materials and information on our website. So what I'm saying next, don't feel like you have to get that down word for word. And in fact, I can send a one-pager, which Bill can send out to you on these principles. But starting with the constructive partnership. So this is going to be quick. The constructive partnership, how does the board work with the chief executive? And what's really important there is that it's a relationship where there's trust, mutual respect, and what I like most, no surprises, okay? So whether it's good news, bad news, or just really raising the tough issues, they're in it together. Mission driven, I think you all have that one down. Strategic thinking. Now, key here, I said strategic thinking, not strategic planning. You need both, but quite often we spend a lot of time trying to figure out who do we want on the board, and then we don't engage them intellectually. If there's any reason why board members tend to kind of fall off and stop coming, is because they're not sure what their contribution is, especially if they're showing up to a meeting and not really being tapped for their intellectual capital. I'm going to skip over to intentional board practices. This is the one that I will highlight today, because if we want boards to be engaged, we have to think about how we're utilizing them. There's precious capital with every board member, and one of the things that we all think about in today's times is we don't have enough time for all the things we want to do, right? So when you take time out to volunteer for an organization, commit to a cause, you want to make sure that you're doing the right things, focused on the right things, and it's a good use of your time. Return on investment. Continuous learning, we have to continue to feed our board members, and that learning is about, well, top of my list, governance, how to be a good board member, but also the substance of what you're doing. And revitalization focuses on who's on your bus, who's sitting around your board table taking up those key seats, and are they the right people? How strategic are you on the front end in identifying board members, and how are you preparing them for the work that's ahead? So let me start with board building. We have what we refer to as the board building cycle. It has 9 steps, and you'll see I have highlighted in blue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those steps. And I'm wondering, what are your top considerations when you're thinking about filling board seats or vacancies? What are your top considerations? Yes. Experience and skills they can bring to the board. Relationships. What was that? Treasure. Yes. Commitment to the organization. Anyone else? Diversity and what you need to accomplish what you want to accomplish. right, so those are all good answers. And let me ask you this. How many of you have a governance committee, or maybe it's a nominating committee? Okay. How often does that committee meet? Is it like once monthly? Okay, and monthly, are they vetting candidates, identifying potential new board members, striking up relationships? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. So it's a mix. It's a mix. Here's the beauty of a governance committee. This is my favorite committee. No surprise there, right? My favorite committee, because this is a committee that pays attention to the needs of the board. Quite often when we don't have the mix of individuals that we need on the board is because we haven't put the work in. There's a good bit of due diligence that should occur on an ongoing basis. Don't wait until someone says, oh, it's time for me to step off of the board, or you have a vacancy coming up. If you want to be strategic about board building, it's an ongoing process. It never stops. You're always looking at, what do we need? The woman in the back mentioned skill sets and talent. And when I work with boards, I sit down with the strategic plan. I want to know, what are your key goals, your imperatives? What are you trying to accomplish, not just this year, but for the next 5 years? Okay? And we actually create grids and spreadsheets. What are the talent sets that we have? For some organizations, it's important to look at the geographic representation. We look at all types of diversity. We want to have a mix: age, gender, race, ethnicity, to make sure that we have it covered in terms of, who are your constituents? And is your board fairly representative of the audience that you serve? So that's why this is work that is ongoing, because sometimes the relationships or the individuals that you identify, you have to actually establish a relationship or get on their radar, okay? So that work is ongoing. That's in the identify stage. Cultivate means, how are you getting to know them and starting to share your expectations? So there are a couple of things here in cultivate and setting expectations. Expectations, or setting expectations and really orienting individuals to the board, is one of the most overlooked steps of all. And I don't know why, because it's the one that pays off in dividends. If individuals know, and I would imagine for the woman in the back who says she has an exceptional board, they all roll up their sleeves, they work, etc., they know what they're getting into. But for some of you, I have a sneaky suspicion that maybe the work or the roles and responsibilities are downplayed a little bit. Maybe the board is sold as, this is a great organization, we all like each other, we have fun. It's not that much work. Well, guess what? Sitting on any governing board these days, it's work. It's work. And if you don't ask for much, you're not going to get it. So we have to really be honest about that. And this step on orient, that is providing a formal orientation to the board and the organization. So who has seen this little pinwheel before? Some of you. And that process that I described, even without going through all of it, is that how you approach building your board? If not, if it occurs more like this, group of people sitting in a room, we really could use more people on the board, and we need people with wealth so that they can open up their checkbooks. Who do you know? Okay, and then you get a list of names. Maybe some of them pan out or some of them don't, and then you do it all over again. Who do you know? Not very strategic. Another thing, the board should really be engaged in this process. So I say that as a way of opening it up, a little bit of food for thought, and then I'm going to keep it moving because I have 2 more topics to cover. How do your strategic goals and priorities factor into board recruitment? So it's not just who do you know and who has the most money. Granted, resources, we all need them, but that's not the same as governance. And if you have people who are giving to your organization, but you give them a seat on the board, but they're not showing up, then it sets a different tone for the rest of the people on the board. They're starting to think, well, you know, if I miss a meeting, it's okay, because Sally got special treatment. Got to hold everyone to the same standards. What expectations are set for board member engagement? And truly, what is the highest and best use of your board? When you think of these individuals, that you spend a good bit of time trying to figure out whether or not they will be a good fit. I always say, just like real estate. In real estate, what matters? Location, location, location. With the board, what's the highest and best use of their time? What's the highest and best use of their talents? How do you want to tap into these individuals? They want to make a difference. No one needs just another meeting to show up to and not make a difference. For those of you who have that piece figured out, are you actually getting the best out of your board? And if not, so let's segue. Couple of things. Culture of inquiry. I love this because I started off framing this as, you know, how are we tapping into the intellectual capital of board members? And that was something that I saw sitting in the back of the room as I observed you during the table talk. In your board meetings, and tell me honestly, are your board meetings as lively as what I saw when I came in this room? Now, you were already engaged in table talk. Okay, we're going to hold out on perfect board in the back. Who has a lively board meeting? Pretty lively? I'm going to go to the gentleman in the back. Oh, he's going to go to you. I'm going to give you a microphone. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. How often does your board meet?
Twice a month.
Twice a month?
Yep.
Oh.
Bear in mind that we are voluntary, all retired, and we're brand new, so we're feeling our way.
Okay, because I almost stumbled on that one, twice a month. I'm not sure I want to go down this road with you. It's okay, I've already started. Twice a month, and how long are the meetings?
I would say we average an hour and a half.
An hour and a half, twice a month. What's your agenda look like? What's on your agenda? Typical agenda. How do you open a meeting?
Summary from the president, report from the treasurer, report from the various committees.
And then what? Old business, new business, adjourn?
New business, but we hope we've gotten old business in all of that, in the various committee reports. And then new business, and there usually is at least one hot topic that we're worried about that we have to spend at least 30 minutes on toward the end of the meeting.
Okay, so there is a hot topic. I like that. And is the hot topic framed as a question?
It is.
Okay, so I asked that because where we were going initially with the committee reports and the new business and the chief executive's report, my question is, okay, where's the excitement in that? You know, what's going to make me come back to the next meeting because this one was so invigorating? But I like the hot topic, and that's important. Even if you are meeting twice a month, I would know that's not the board for me. So I've heard from a couple of you that your board is, your board members are all retired. Is that intentional for the councils? Yes. I know you can't hear. She says the demographic of World Affairs councils.
Not all of them, because
No.
it's not like that at all.
Okay. I asked that question because it just as a little footnote, something to watch for. We need to make sure that, and especially, and I listened to you talk about the competition with the students, we need to make sure that we have fresh ideas, that, again, just thinking of who you're working with, and I know that the competitions aren't all that you do, but we have to have that diversity of thought. We need different perspectives at the table. Not to say anything bad, negative about the retirees. That's, you know, it's wonderful they have the time to give. I worked with a board there wasn't a single person on that board under 65 was the youngest, so it was 65 and up. And one of their top strategic priorities was to recruit younger board members. And this was really interesting to observe. I went to one of their board meetings. This is a board that was meeting 4 times a year, 4 days in a row, so that has its own barriers, who can devote that much time. And at this board meeting that I was attending, they had 2 new board members showing up who were young. They were like 55. And the first woman, she walks in the room and she sits down, and another board member says, "Oh no, you can't sit there. Charlie always sits there. You have to sit somewhere else." So this board member, she looks up, I'm in a corner, I'm like, I can't help you. You know, they had such a culture within that board that was so uninviting that they didn't even realize it. But I'll say this also about the board, they love to party. I won't even get into it, but they do love the party, and they always have a hospitality suite. So pluses and minuses, any way you look at it, but something to be aware of. When we talk about diversity in terms of the board, is for those diverse perspectives, tapping into it, and making sure that we don't have blind spots. Back to culture of inquiry, constructive debate. So I love the fact that you said that there's always a hot topic. Every agenda should have something that engages the board. It might be discussion, not leading where they don't have to make a decision, but what is it that the board should be talking about? You have to figure that out. But before you can go there, you have to make sure that you have a board that really expects and appreciates great questions. That's one of the greatest gifts that a board can bring, is asking the challenging questions, really helping figure out, are we talking about the right things? Are we doing the right things? Not just because it's always been done that way. What do we need to change? How is the environment or the landscape changing around us? And as board members out in the community, they have the ability to scan these things. Do they enlist different sources of information? Do you bring in speakers to talk about topics? And even in how you organize your meetings, how do you break up the monotony? Do you ever have a meeting outside of your regular meeting place? Get out in the community, go somewhere as a board so that you can do what we call work at the boundaries and have that experience that you can then take back into the boardroom and figure out, oh, we need to have a different type of conversation based on what we saw and learned together. I'll give you a quick story on this. So in my intro, where is Mary? Anyway, it was mentioned that, oh, thank you. You took off the red jacket, that's why. Okay, you mentioned that I work with Smart Start agencies, and these are kind of like Head Start programs, but a little different. And in North Carolina, the Smart Start agencies, they administer state government funds to different programs. And there's an agency in every county, or for every county. One of the agencies I was working with was in a very rural county. And when I would fly down for the board meeting, this was one of those board meetings that was 1 hour. They would start at noon. Everyone would come in and either get the pizza or the sandwich, sit around the table. The executive director would open the meeting, right? They would have reading of or approval of the minutes. All of the reports were given by staff, either the executive director or staff. And I'm sorry, let me back up. The board chair would welcome everyone to the meeting. Then she would turn it over to the executive director. My first meeting with them, I didn't hear from a single board member except for that board chair opening the meeting. The rest of it was staff. And I said, we have a lot of work to do. Now, this was a board where you had designated individuals serving on the board, someone from Department of Health, someone from the education system, et cetera, right? So at least half of the board, designated seats. And they're there for a reason. That was written into the bylaws of this program. but they didn't get it. And next meeting, we mixed things up a little bit. I came back, third meeting, the executive director had a little short school bus in front of the library where they met. So everybody climbed on the school bus, and we went throughout the county visiting the different programs that they funded. And it was like seeing that epiphany, the light bulb go off. One of the board members asked a program director, "Do you have such and such curriculum?" "You don't? I can get you that, because this is what kids, the 2- and 3-year-olds need." We went to the next location, saw the same thing happen, and then board members started talking to each other. By the next meeting, completely different experience. We had gone from the meeting where it's mostly the executive director talking to board members finally figuring out why they're there and having the types of conversations they needed to have, especially as it related to funding. Why? Because before they weren't even being strategic about those decisions. It was all pro forma. Well, we have this much money. We know there are this many, organizations serving kids in our community. We'll divide it up pretty much like so. Instead of thinking about what is the impact we need to have, who's doing the work that's really serving this community, and as the stewards of this funding and these resources, how can we make a difference? Completely different conversation. So when we talk about engaging board members, it's not that they don't want to be engaged, but quite often we're not setting up the work that they want to do. And that's a two-way street. Catalytic questions. Sometimes throwing a question in there that just makes them think. I've given you a couple of examples. Top one here. What's the biggest gap between the case we make for support and what our actual accomplishments and actions? And what does this say about us? To have a conversation about that. What are our successes and setbacks? How and why did they happen, and what does it mean for the future? Or how about it's the year 2020 and we've achieved whatever desired recognition you want as a council. That achievement could not have happened if the board of directors had not, you fill in the blank. And one that I love that really makes boards think about what they're doing, I call it the legacy question. If you go out, just think even 5 years into the future, what will your organization's constituents say about this board? What was the impact, contribution, or difference that this board, the current board, made? If you don't have an answer to that, it might be something you want to think about. So I raise this just to say, got to give the vision, bigger vision, paint that big picture for what you could be accomplishing. And my third topic, meetings that matter. If you have not figured out by now, meetings are my pet peeve. Why? Because like everyone in this room, we really don't have time to waste. We're excited about giving back, volunteering, and serving, but there are a couple of things that will set me off like nothing else. Here's one. Walking into a board meeting and hearing this sound. Oh, let me do this right. I have too much paper here. Shouldn't be this hard. Hearing this, and it happens even still. What is that? Someone opening their board packet. For those who still mail them, and there are some organizations that do. So what does that mean? Somebody's not prepared. They haven't read it. They're not ready to engage. And yet we let that happen. Now, it used to happen more often before email, but opening the board packet, not being prepared. Or taking up, here's one of my favorite stories. I was working with a board, and at their board meeting, they had a lot of issues to discuss, plus they were approving the annual budget, which was millions and millions and millions of dollars. But this 50-person board took approximately 30 minutes to approve the minutes from the last meeting. 30 minutes. And you know what kind of comments they were making? You need a comma after such and such a word. And I thought, oh my gosh. Now, being an attorney, you know what I started doing? I hear cha-ching, cha-ching, billable hours. 50 of you in the room, and that's how you want to spend your time? Not good. And the staff member that I was coordinating with, he just leaned over and he said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you have to see this. And then he said, now watch this. They're going to approve a $20 million budget like that and not ask a single question. And sure enough, budget came up. Any questions? No. Why? Because you can't wrap your arms around that like you can syntax and commas and semicolons. That's where they chose to dig in. Not a good use of time. So there are really some easy practices that can help get us out of that. It's kind of a reactionary mode. It's like if you put it in front of us, we're going to act on it instead of really thinking about how we want to use our time and how we should use it. So a couple of things. If you want to have really good meetings, pay attention to the agenda, okay? It can't be the same thing over and over and over. That redundancy is enough to signal that there's nothing new going on. Tip 1, consent agendas. How many of you use consent agendas? And I would guess some of you don't know what a consent agenda is, so I'm going to go ahead and explain it. A consent agenda is a time saver, first and foremost, because you're going to group together routine items that really do not require discussion. And you do that so that the board can pass it, it's with one vote without having to dig in. So let's say approval of the minutes from the last meeting, committee reports, where the committee really isn't seeking advice of the board. They're not trying to get an important question answered, but the committee reports, a lot of times we go through them to show, A, that the committee met, B, that committee chair wants to have something to talk about at the meeting, so C, we let him or her talk about it, but they are essentially giving us a recap of a report that we should have read in advance. Put that on the consent agenda. So now, instead of taking up maybe 30, 45 minutes of your board meeting with routine items, you clear all that out, top 3-5 minutes, you have time to have those strategic discussions. Yes? The minutes can be part of a consent, she asked, can they be part of a consent agenda? Yes. Yes. It is not, because the board, you move approval of the consent agenda second, so moved. All in favor, aye, aye. Now all of that stuff is done. Now, that requires that materials go out in advance. Individuals need to read the material so that they'll know what they're approving. And if they want to make changes, they can contact whoever's responsible for the minutes or the reports. And board members always have the option of asking that an item be removed from the consent agenda for discussion. So we're not sweeping anything under the rug, no secrets, but it is a very valuable tool. More questions on that? So I thought I saw a couple of hands. Background information. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if it's directly related, but when you recruit, do you have some inkling of a person who is thinking strategically and where you want to go? I've spent a lot of time on boards, and I taught management for many years, and I asked our board to write a vision statement. None of them did, except one guy, and he missed the whole point. He got on the internet and looked for a good one. And my feeling is, if you're in an organization and you're not passionate about its future and what could be, you're just not where you ought to be.
Mm-hmm. So the passion piece is what really strikes me, trying to figure out what the organization could be and where it's headed. That could be work that's done by the group. What we know at BoardSource from our research is that boards get very excited about strategic planning. I mean, not the ongoing process, but when they actually get together and they're in those breakout groups and thinking about the organization, they love that work. But to do it in isolation might not get at, is this a good strategic thinker? And not only that, people have different talents, different ways that they engage. I could be very passionate about your organization. I happen to know I'm a very linear thinker, but my CEO is a very big picture thinker. But put the two of us together is very powerful. But one of us alone, she would overcommit us, and I would be like, let's take this step, this step, this step. And that's why it works so well together. So they're going to engage with you in different ways. Having an inkling about how a person is going to contribute, how have you engaged with them before inviting them to sit on the board? Are there opportunities for them to serve on committees, to volunteer, to show some connection to your mission? So there are a number of organizations I know that you cannot get that seat on the committee before you've had some intimate dealings with the organization, either as a volunteer or, like I said, serving on one of their committees. There are different ways that we vet people. So something to think about. More questions? Yes.
This is slightly off topic, just a degree or two, because you've been talking about governing boards.
Mm-hmm.
But could you comment on the pluses and minuses of an advisory or honorary board to take care of those people with the deep pockets, or to take care of those leaders in the community who don't have time to be on a working board, and how that kind of relates to the governing board?
Yes. Excellent question. That's a perfect way to engage individuals who either do not want the oversight and ongoing responsibilities of a governing board. It's also a way to tap into individuals, as you said, leaders in the community, or sometimes if we have term limits and someone has been very connected to the organization, they want to remain active, but they have termed out, they might go onto another board. Well, I would call it something other than an advisory board, and that's because sometimes that gets people confused. But using, whether it's an advisory group, committee, council, whatever you decide to call it, you have to have clarity around what is their purpose. So, in other words, just like when we set up committees for the board, develop charters, what are the objectives, how often will they meet, and to whom are they accountable? Some advisory groups are accountable to the board. Some of them are accountable to staff, just depending on what your purpose is. But for these more honorary boards, you might bring them together once or twice a year. So have a program or breakfast, tell them about what you've been doing, keep them connected to the mission, and even look for opportunities where they might be able to engage in an activity, but don't just set it up so that you can get their check. Okay? So actually host something for them. If you have a newsletter that goes out periodically, even electronically, keep them in the loop. A lot of times we don't take full advantage of our relationships. Even when people rotate off the board, sometimes that's the last they ever hear from an organization they have just given their blood, sweat, and tears to for the past 7 years. And the only thing they ever hear maybe or get from that organization is an annual appeal. Not really good. It's not a good look. Yes? Oh, sorry.
So I'm wondering if I could ask for a moment of inspiration from you and ask what your definition of governance is.
My definition, BoardSource uses a definition. We say it is to, gosh, I haven't been asked that in a long time. It is to lead from a position of authority, to steer, to guide. And that can be whether it's an organization, a country, but there are two things that are really critical in that definition for me. It is, one, this idea of leading, and two, authority. So when we have governing boards, there's some grant of authority. That's usually from the state, wherever the organization is incorporated, that says that this organization must have a board. Now, that's a very technical definition. What I really like in terms of defining governance is providing the strategic direction, vision, and oversight for an organization, constantly asking a couple of questions such as, where are we headed? How are we doing? And something about impact and results, which is essentially how will we know when we get there? That would be governance for me. Yes?
One of the benefits of diversity is that you get a lot of different opinions. And another benefit is that people come in with a non-common language. Our board is made up of retired people who are from academics, corporate, military, federal and state government. And we all have a different language. And when we embarked upon a strategic planning process, the former academics just went into convulsions and said, I will not do another academic exercise. So my question is there a time at a board meeting to talk about a common language so that the academics, the military, the corporate all come together and say, well, this is our definition. This board of directors, this is our definition of fill in the blank.
Good luck with that common language. I don't think you're really going to get it with that group, but there's definitely, you can create opportunities to come together and to have that board share what is your vision for the organization. And indeed, a board should have that conversation. How you do that and how you facilitate that conversation can vary. So you mentioned with diversity, there's an great opportunity to have all these different languages, and the reality is with diversity, you also have challenges. Okay, that's the reality. So when I say have the conversation facilitated, it's because sometimes we have to learn how to navigate in this new terrain. Not everyone is speaking the same language, so to speak. But coming together for that common purpose. And one of the things that I like to focus on, regardless of the individual's background, what they do in their day job, if they still have a 9-to-5, and whatever the conflicts or differences are, is to figure out why we're here, okay? Ask your board members, why are you here? Why are you serving on this board? You have to understand what is their connection to the mission. And if that connection is sincere, you can find common ground, because the individuals should want to do what's in the best interests of the council. When you start having personal agendas, maybe someone's on the board so that their name can be on the letterhead, or they can report back to whoever they work for that they're serving on this board, what's going to really have them committed and keep them coming back? So find out why they're there. Start there. Yes. Mike is coming.
Thank you. I have a very practical question. All volunteer board, all volunteer everything, okay? Spend a lot of hours. Some weeks, I would say I spend easily 40 hours or more.
40?
I'm retired, so it's basically a full-time job as a retiree. And so my question is, we are trying to move the board in the direction of codifying it and kind of filling in all of that. And I think we're on the right track, and we're doing a lot of things you're saying. But is there a way that we can kind of cheat a little bit? Are there things out there to help with bylaws and the framework and the job expectations and the term limits and the members?
Oh my gosh.
Really? You just go there that would apply? Because it would be great to just kind of take an existing thing and adapt it instead of kind of creating it. All right.
All right. If you're spending your 40 hours on that, I can save you 40, 80, 120 hours immediately. So BoardSource, we've been around for 26 years, and we were formed, it's a nonprofit organization formed to fill a void or this gap in the sector in terms of having and developing excellent resources for nonprofit organizations. We have a number of publications, so to speak to your point specifically, board member job descriptions or agreements, committee charters, policies. We have a book called The Policy Sampler, which has several examples of pretty much any type of policy that your nonprofit would need, and you can download it. Now, our books are not all free. We have some free topic papers, some have a fee. The publications, you can buy it whole, but say the policy sampler, you can download like portions of it for a really small cost. We have another book that I love called The Dashboard, which looks at, metrics. We should all be results oriented. What are you tracking and how do you set that up? Board roles and responsibilities. So that's what we do. Thank you for, did somebody ask that question? Yes.
I really didn't mean this as a sales pitch, but I'll tell you in the last year, BoardSource has been of tremendous value to me. The Global Tie, when you're a member of Global Ties, we become a member of BoardSource. Don't know if that relationship could exist for the WACA councils, but I've been dealing with governance, I've been dealing with a lot of things. I'm constantly downloading and buying, and I can't thank that relationship enough for the support it's given me even the last year.
I was a fan of BoardSource before I started working there, and that's how I knew about them. I was doing a lot of governance work, and I was constantly on the website. Woman in the back, and then I'm going to wrap this up because I know
What
my
is your
time up.
website?
It's www.boardsource.org. Boardsource.org, and I will leave some business cards. So I was talking about meetings. The last thing that I wanted to cover in this topic, do you ever evaluate your meetings? If you want to find out if you're giving your board members what they want, what they expect, and if not, how you can change that, you have to be willing to ask the question. Okay? So there are a couple of different ways to evaluate meetings. One is you can engage in an exercise that takes 5, maybe 10 minutes at the most, and just ask them, what makes a good meeting? Someone is listing this, all the topics, what they say. You may hear things such as start on time, end on time, food, whatever it is. Get that list together, cull the list so that it is no more than a page. Maybe there are 10 things on your list, your top 10, and build some consensus. This is what we like. Develop it into a one-page form so that at the end of meetings, when they look at it, before they walk out the door, they have to check either we met expectations, we need improvement, and leave some room for comments. Board chair and chief executive or whoever's in charge should look at those at the end of the meeting. If you want more detail, you could ask some open-ended questions or give them a combination. I listed some examples here, such as the issues we covered today were, and it's a scale from less important to essential, materials provided, not helpful to indispensable. Today's discussions concern primarily, was it operations or policy and strategy? And a number of you have boards that are wearing multiple hats. They're doing the governance work, but they're also volunteering. So just having the clarity around that. What might we have done differently to improve our meeting? What was the most valuable contribution we made to the organization's welfare today? Did we use our time allotted wisely? And in light of today's meeting, what are the most important topics we should address at our next meeting? So being very intentional in crafting the agenda, setting up the meeting and even the meeting room to engage them in discussion, and figuring out what they want out of the meeting, it's very helpful. That's my timer. It says my time is up. You have to know that, keeping them engaged, it can be a moving target. But that's why you have to ask, what would you do differently? How much of what we're doing is a result of history and habit as opposed to being strategic? That's all I have for you.
Vernetta, you are right on target. I want to thank you very much on behalf of the World Affairs Councils of America for your engaging humor and insight. You have certainly established a culture of inquiry here and made this meeting matter. We really appreciate BoardSource, and I take the suggestion of Maura that our organization needs to be involved because as I said at the top, we really are about delivering value and making you all the strongest, best organizations that you can be. We need to do that, and that's the way we're going to grow and expand and reach our targets and fulfill our missions. Thanks very much. Vernetta Walker, BoardSource.